Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz Podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 400, and today's guest is Rylan Hamiton, CEO and co-founder of Bluewater Autonomy. Episode 400. It's another milestone episode. On November 2nd, 2017, I published the first episode of the VentureFizz Podcast. My first 11 episodes were an experiment where I interviewed talent acquisition leaders. Christina Luconi was my first guest. Thank you, Christina. After seeing the potential, I pivoted to interviewing mainly founders and investors of startups in Boston and New York City. I want to send out a shout out to all the great guests that I've had through the years and all their time to share their stories with me and the VentureFizz audience. It's been a pleasure to interview all of you. For episode 400, I wanted to interview someone who not only has an extraordinary background, but someone who is also still building. Interviewing Rylan for this milestone episode was a no-brainer. Rylan's professional career has been one of exploration and not just one linear path. From graduating from Harvard to enlisting in the Navy as an engineering officer for surface warfare, to Harvard Business School, to being the first employee at Run My Errand, which later became TaskRabbit, to learning warehouse robotics at Kiva Systems, which ended up being the second largest acquisition by Amazon at that point in time, to starting his own warehouse robotics company called 6 River Systems, which was acquired by Shopify for $450 million, to now working on his latest startup, which no doubt is his biggest swing yet, and that is Bluewater Autonomy, a startup building autonomous ships for the open ocean. The company recently announced a $50 million Series A round of funding led by GV. This is shortly after announcing a $14 million seed round of funding earlier this year, back in April. In this interview, we cover how Rylan's service in the armed forces helped shape his career, his full background story, plus all the chapters along the way, to all the details about Bluewater Autonomy and how this company is disrupting and re-energizing the ship industry in the United States, and so much more. Okay, now a quick word from our podcast sponsor, Silicon Valley Bank. I'm excited to share that this podcast is brought to you by one of the strongest longtime supporters of the local startup ecosystem, that being Silicon Valley Bank, a division of First Citizens Bank. SVB serves innovative tech, healthcare, and life sciences companies, including 60% of CNBC's Disruptor 50 list, 72% of Forbes Cloud 100 list, and 48% of Forbes AI 50 list companies. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Rylan. Rylan, thanks so much for joining us.
Keith, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you. So there's a lot going on right now. One, I've been doing this podcast for a long time. It's like 7-8 years now. So I am on episode 400. And when I was like, who am I going to have as this milestone guest? I was like, I want an entrepreneur that has success. They've done a lot in their career, but they're building again. And I couldn't think of a more perfect guest than you and what you're building with Bluewater Autonomy. I had like a post on LinkedIn about your company, and it was like, autonomous vehicles, they're cool, but you know what's really effing cool is like autonomous ships built for the open ocean. And what you're building is so awesome, and I'm so excited to talk about that. But before we get into all that, let's talk about your a little bit about your, we're not going to go into the full background story yet, but a little bit about your background. You're in the Navy and how that experience helped shape you as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So for this company, it definitely helped me understand the customer and the missions that the Navy does every day with their existing ships, and then helped me sort of take my background over the last 15 years being sort of automation and robotics and kind of rethink like how could we do these same missions but do them better and do them with a kind of existing technology. And so I think my current role is kind of the fusion of all of my previous experiences. In addition to being in the Navy, it takes a lot of grit and resolve to kind of like do that job every single day. And so being an entrepreneur, whether you're the entrepreneur or you're in an early stage startup, takes a lot of grit and resolve. Things aren't easy. It always feels like you're under-resourced. You're always trying to move faster. But you just know that if you put your head down, you can kind of accomplish a lot. And I think the experience that I had in the Navy kind of built that into my DNA, and that's something that I carry on today.
And your experience, when we're going to talk about your full background story, because I just think it's like one of those backgrounds that I don't know if every step was intentional, but you created this portfolio of experiences that I thought was like just so different than a linear path of somebody that going from A to B to C to D to E. It was like you took these different detours that all comes together now of what you're doing with Bluewater. But let's take that step back. So where'd you grow up? What were you like as a child?
Um, so I grew up in Boston, and I'm proud to be a Red Sox and a Patriots fan. I love the city. I love this area, but grew up in Boston, and then I was a city boy kind of when I was growing up. I actually was raised by my mom, who's a single mom, and it was only until I was later in life that I got some experiences where I got to go away to summer camp in Maine, and I got to go to camps in Buzzards Bay, where found that I actually had a love of the water and actually took up sailing at a young age. But between being in Boston and going to school here, and then spending summers kind of on the water, that's kind of was like my early childhood.
Okay, so what led you to Harvard to study applied math with economics?
Um, so I never thought I would stay in Boston this long, but I was very fortunate. I studied hard. I think I was kind of well-rounded, kind of growing up, and I got into Harvard. I'd always loved math. I think I'm kind of a systems thinker, and I actually studied applied math, not math, because in applied math you have a problem and you come up with a solution. And so I kind of love that. And I studied economics as I thought I'd go into business, but I learned later on that as I said before, I'm not like that 9 to 5, Monday through Friday type guy.
Okay, so when you talked about you enlisted into the Navy, what did prompt that decision? I mean, because timing wise, kind of interesting. It was post 9/11. From what I researched, you have some family history in the Navy too, right?
Yeah. So I graduated from college in 2002. And so 9/11 happened while I was in school. And I think a lot of myself and my peers were all affected by that. And we said, what else can we do in life? And so we definitely and you talked about kind of linear career paths that people had, but I think a lot of us were definitely motivated to go serve our country. And at that moment, I had a love for the water, but also my father went to the Naval Academy. He was actually part of the Rickover Navy, the Navy that actually really moved the ball forward in terms of advancing nuclear submarines. So he served on nuclear submarines in the 60s. I had two uncles who also served, and I had a grandfather who served in the Pacific in World War II. And so I really kind of reached back to that part of my family history. And I started talking to other people who had also served the Navy, and they all said, like, it's the best thing that you could ever do. But my mom had remarried, and my adoptive father at the time said, and he'd been in business his whole career, and he's like, I don't know about this whole Navy thing and all that. But I just did a bunch of research, and again, as I took a bet, and it was a great bet. And went to Officer Candidate School in Pensacola, Florida, did push-ups, sit-ups, all the things you have to do to kind of get commissioned in the Navy. And after 3 months of boot camp, I joined the fleet.
Right. So this was so you were on large ships, right? And this is where I want to geek out a little bit because this is experience that you were helping transport. When I thought about the military, the amphibious vehicles need to get somewhere. And there needs to be ships that take them to another country to have their tanks, their, Land Rovers, everything. So that was the first ship you were on, if my
Yeah.
research is
So my
correct.
first ship I was in the Amphib Navy. I was an amphibious transport ship. It was a USS Ponce LPD-15. And that ship was basically a utility ship for the Marines. And so we could carry all of their equipment, including tanks and helicopters and the Marines themselves, so up to 800 Marines, and transport them all around the world. And when I met the ship, we were in the Persian Gulf, and the Marines were basically disembarking into Kuwait just before we invaded Iraq back in 2003. And I was an engineering officer. So I was an electrical officer, and there were about 50 engineers on that ship. They were constantly standing watch, maintaining and repairing that ship. And so rather than doing the cool kind of sexy stuff in the Navy, I was down in the engine rooms, just keeping the ship running all the time. And that was the first half of my career in the Navy.
So that ship must be its own city to have that many people and all that equipment on it. I just thinking, I'm like,
Yeah.
that is a massive ship.
I mean, when you think about ships, people just, you can basically disaggregate into three components. You've got the platform of the hull, the thing that carries things. And then basically on that, you carry basically a hotel. And that hotel burrs and feeds everyone who's on that ship. And then you've got the payloads and the things that matter that you're carrying all around. And so, yeah, it is really a floating city. And we had over 1,000 people on that ship that just, every day just were either sleeping or eating or standing watch. And so it was a busy time.
All right. So then you went to a small, just like it was a small, small
It's a,
200 feet frigate. Am I pronouncing that
yeah.
right?
So it's called a frigate. It's a little bit bigger,
Frigate.
but basically it's like a small destroyer. It's basically a more cost-effective, low-cost destroyer. So instead of two shafts, it has one shaft. And instead of carrying a lot of missiles, it might carry one missile or some other kind of weapons that are on it. But basically, it can do a lot of missions that you don't want the expensive kind of destroyer to do. And so whether it's escorting other ships or doing patrols, we actually did counter-narco terrorism operations in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific on the frigate, and it was a pretty wild time. But on that ship, I actually got to be sort of get out of the engine room, and I was a navigator, and so we got to sail all around the world on the frigate.
All right. So what was like the midnight bridge watch experience like?
So if you ever are thinking about joining the Navy, just imagine being on the bridge in the middle of the night, looking into kind of nothing. Now, sometimes it can be a clear night and you can see stars all around you, but generally there's not a lot going on. And some people like myself are just like enamored. It's just amazing being out in the middle of the ocean, and you just have a lot of respect because there's only so much you can control. You can't just escape and go back home. Like you're on something and it has to be working all the time, but you wouldn't be alone either. So you'd be standing watch on a bridge with about 10 other people. There'd be people back in the combat room also standing watch and people in the engine room. And so it was kind of like a small team that was together standing watch in the middle of the night. And there's just a sense of camaraderie and kind of awe of the ocean. And so I always thought that if that was my job, just standing watch on a bridge on a naval warship, I would do that for the rest of my life. I didn't always enjoy like the bureaucracy and the paperwork, and shore duty didn't sound as exciting, but like, I don't know, there's a love of just being, on a ship and operating it.
Well, here's a fun fact about me. My grandfather was a merchant marine. I know that that's not an actual part of the armed forces, but still on the water, of course, and transporting cargo and other ships. So we got a little
And
commonality there.
And I know there's not a script for what we're talking about, but there's an amazing museum in New Orleans all about World War II and just the amount of heroics for the merchant marines and how important it was for us to be able to transport all of the supplies across the Atlantic during World War II. And so for anyone who's watching this, if you're ever in New Orleans, it's one of the best museums I've ever been to.
I didn't know that. So my grandfather, who I never met because he was hit by a torpedo, his ship went down when my dad was a baby. So he was, and there's like a sector in a book that was written about that ship that he was on. So it could be in that museum for all I know. I need to check that out. So thanks for the heads up. So, all right. So after the Navy, what'd you do next?
So after the Navy, I got out. I actually didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I didn't want to go back to that desk job. And I actually spent a summer working for Suffolk Construction in construction management. I actually worked on the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, which right on Boylston Street, sort of in downtown Boston. But then I went to graduate school. And in graduate school, I started to explore again to try to figure out what I wanted to do next. But the great thing about graduate school is that I started to figure out the difference between product and marketing, and then realized there's a role called product marketing. But I was at school and actually graduated in 2009. It's kind of similar when I got out of college in 2002. The economy is like so-so. And so like there weren't a lot of like, job fairs where people like, come work for us, work for us. You kind of had to like
it was
be
bad.
a little bit scrappy.
It was
a little bit bad. So it was kind of easy to say like, oh, maybe I want to go work for a startup. Why not? And I actually was the first full-time employee at this little startup called, at the time, Run My Errand, that became TaskRabbit, that was started in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
So when I figured that out, I'm like, wait a second. I totally remember Leah before she moved to the West Coast. She's an amazing entrepreneur and she's done so well. But I was like, wait, Rylan was one of the first, or now you just told me the first employee of this company. So what was that like? Because, now we look at that business model as, oh, it's just, DoorDash and all these delivery companies. That was so revolutionary. It was just the early days of the iPhone. So, and this is your first startup, right? Tech startup, at least.
Yeah. So Leah had this amazing idea, and she's like, there's this thing called the iPhone, and it allows us to connect people in ways that we never could before. So rather than people having to go to a computer and figure out what they want to do, you could create an app, they could go into a browser. And so she wanted to create, and she created service economies. It was actually before Uber. So we were hosting ride sharing before Uber was doing ride sharing in San Francisco. But I also learned how hard startups are. And this was a business to consumer app. And we actually, you've probably run into Scott Kirshner, who
Of
has been a
course.
long time kind of writer about tech in the Boston community. And I remember he wrote an article about TaskRabbit, and it was like the July 4th weekend, and we were on the front page of the Boston Globe business section. And prior to that, we'd been in like downtown Crossing, handing out flyers, trying to convince people to go to this website called Run My Errand and basically try out the kind of like the task, basically find people to do errands for them. And we had like some success, and Leah had started off going to like local moms groups in Charlestown, Massachusetts, if I remember correctly. But we're like, well, if we're in the Boston Globe, everyone's going to know about us, and we're going to have this chart that's up and to the right for investors in terms of usage and adoption, and things will be amazing. And we got some attention, but then it kind of like fizzled out, and I was like, wow, this is going to be really hard. And so at that moment, Leah actually ended up moving the company to the West Coast. I moved on to another company called Vistaprint, but I just learned how hard it is to start a company. And so that kind of set the bar for like the next company I wanted to start, because I said, these are really hard. It's not like you come out with a business plan, you raise a little bit of money, and everything just happens. So
How'd you meet Leah?
I had met Leah through an investor, and my background, I just, finished graduate school. I'd been in the Navy, and I kind of was an ops person. And I said, I'm willing to take a bet. And so we met over coffee actually in Beacon Hill. And then I started working for her part-time while I was at school. And then right after basically as I was graduating, I was working for her full-time. And then Leah actually got accepted into the Facebook fund and spent the summer in San Francisco. And so I went out there a couple times. We went into like the Facebook office when there were like 200 people or something like that.
No
And some of
way.
the founders, I think it was Logan, I can't remember the others, but the founders of Zipcar, or no, not Zipcar, the founders of Lyft were also part of that Facebook fund back in the day.
Really?
And they had also a ride sharing app. And so it was definitely the early days of kind of like the app economy.
Okay, so the next chapter, which was another fun fact I learned about you with Vistaprint. So who did you work? What were you working on, and who'd you work with at Vistaprint?
Um, so I realized that startups are hard, and I had a family at that time, and I wanted to join like an established company. And Vistaprint, like, and still to this day, is like a very impressive company that was one of the early companies to figure out how to make a really profitable business online. And so they're selling, marketing material to small businesses. And they were doing things like A/B testing before anyone was doing A/B testing, and they were doing online ads and a bunch of different things. And so I joined, and I was in a small group of people, but I would actually surrounded myself with future founders. And so Dina Gray hired me into Vistaprint, but I had people like Jason Robbins and Mary Biggins, like they were on a team of like 10 people, and we'd all huddle up once a week working on different like marketing campaigns. And as you know, like Jason went off to start DraftKings. Mary's a serial entrepreneur. She's now the founder, CEO of MealPass. She was an early employee at Betterment. But like I didn't realize at the time just the quality of people that were there at Vistaprint.
And you were hired by Dina Gray too. I didn't know that part, but yeah, Vistaprint, amazing anchor company, great people, very data-driven organization ahead of its time. And yeah, the entrepreneurs that have come out of there have done extraordinary things. Speaking of extraordinary, Kiva Systems, your next stop. So this was probably, I don't know if the acquisition had already happened. I think, well, it might have, but I saw Mick Mounts speak. Eric Paley from Founder Collective would have these founder dialogue events that he would host, and he'd have guest speakers. And I saw him speak, and he showed a video with the warehouse automation robots doing its thing. And I was just like, mind blown that I'm like, people figure this stuff out. Like there's so many smart people out there that just can figure stuff out. And that was one of them where I just saw the whole warehouse just doing its thing. So how'd you get involved with Kiva?
Yeah. So love Vistaprint. Business cards are actually really cool, especially what Vistaprint was doing. But what's even cooler to business cards are robots in
Right.
warehouses. And so when I saw Kiva, I fell in love. And it kind of reminded me of like being in the Navy, where I love like physical, tangible things that when you and you have to put them together in a system that works all the time. And that was Kiva. At the time, I did a little bit of research. Um, but I didn't know like the alternatives that were out there. I just said, of course, everyone wants orange robots that are in a warehouse. And so I joined Kiva Systems in 2011. I was employee 200, and I started off as a program manager. Now I got lucky because Dave Minichello, who's now an investor in Bluewater and at Google Ventures, he recruited me into Kiva Systems. I said, Dave, I don't really know much about supply chain. I don't know anything about robotics. You're hiring me to be a program manager. I'm not even sure the difference between being a program manager and a project manager. But like, are you okay with this? And Dave's like, you'll figure this stuff out. It's not rocket science, but like everything you've done today, like will really apply. And I have confidence that you can figure your job out at Kiva. And so I joined in 2011. It was a couple years before Amazon acquired Kiva. And it was definitely during like the hard scaling years. And like all years are hard at a startup. But this was a time when the technology was really working. And a lot of retailers and merchants were moving from kind of traditional like cart picking operations to saying like, wow, our e-commerce business is taking off. And like our last holiday season and Black Friday and Cyber Monday was a disaster and we need something better. And that was Kiva. And so Kiva's business was going up and to the right, something I didn't see at TaskRabbit, but was now seeing at Kiva. And it was like we needed to go from like scaling with heroics, where people would work 100+ hour weeks, to something that was a little bit more scalable. And so I jumped into that company and I did whatever it took to kind of make those customers successful. And the great part about being a program manager was that I got to work with all parts of the business, for everything from sales and marketing to software to hardware engineering, to customer success to support. And so I quickly learned that business and the technology.
So I remember, if my memory is correct, Staples was a customer.
They were.
So when Amazon acquired Kiva, they kind of like halted working with other retailers because they bought it for their own purposes, right? So did that role transition into supporting Amazon internally then, or did you have to like wind down the existing
Yeah.
contracts?
So Amazon didn't halt the work at first. I think they wanted to understand the business a little bit. And so we kept supporting kind of the customers like Staples and Office Depot and Toys R Us and Dillard's. But then at a moment, Amazon said, you know what? Our roadmap's really going to be focused on all of the Amazon warehouses. And so they decided basically to end of life the Kiva technology for all of the sort of external customers. And so there was definitely a transition that we went through. It actually allowed me to spend a lot of times with those other customers outside of Amazon and learn more about their businesses. But yeah, it got a little bit bumpy in terms of that transition. But when I was there and during that transition, there were probably like a couple thousand, or there are thousands of robots in the field. And now there are over 1 million robots in all the Amazon warehouses.
Are there real?
And
I was
so
going to
while
ask you. Yeah.
yeah, but what's not obvious about that acquisition was in the first couple of years after Amazon bought us, like we had to prove ourselves. Amazon's like, well, you guys are really good at robots. You know how to build the robots. But Amazon's like, we're good at software. And so all the teams that were in North Reading and now are spread between North Reading and Westboro basically had to say, like, we need to earn a right to be within Amazon and to keep expanding and to do more with Amazon. And so, it was an intense couple of years. But we started to, when I first joined Kiva, one of my first projects was in Arkansas, and it was a 20 robot deployment. During my last year, I was basically managing multiple deployments into warehouses where there are a couple thousand robots in one Amazon building at the same time. And so to see that scale was just awesome. And we were just like floored when we got to like past like 10,000 robots. To ever think that like 15 years later, they'd be at 1 million robots just like blows my mind.
It's so cool. All right. So Amazon did acquire Kiva for $775 million in a cash transaction, which was the second largest Amazon acquisition at that point in time, 2012.
But I have to say, it was the best acquisition that Amazon ever made. So just want to.
Absolutely, 1,000%. And it's still like that North Reading is still a massive facility, right? Like they're still doing a
It's
ton of
North
work out
Reading,
there.
it's Westboro. I don't know the official number, but there have to be, I don't know, between 5 to 10,000 employees in Massachusetts. And it's probably the most impressive robotics company in the world. And it's just it's amazing. And when I was at Amazon Robotics, the focus was on mobile robotics and robots that followed kind of fiducials or stickers on the floor. And now they've expanded their portfolio into robotic arms and collaborative robots and all different types of automation. So it's really cool to see what they've done over the last 15 years.
All right. So how did you get started with Six River Systems, your own company?
Yeah. So um, when I was at Amazon Robotics, I actually had an opportunity to go work in Seattle and keep kind of challenging myself. I was actually pretty close to moving to Seattle, but I wanted a promotion, and it didn't. That wasn't going to happen. They said, "Why don't you move to Seattle and then we can work on that promotion?" And so I decided to kind of explore other opportunities. And I started to talk to all these different robotic companies, some on the West Coast and a lot sort of in the Boston area, because I knew from those early days at TaskRabbit how hard it is to start a company. And so I was like, why don't I start an start at an early company, or join an early company, someone that has a little bit of capital, they built a product, and I could take my experience from Kiva Systems or Amazon Robotics and help them scale and understand the customer, understand deployment, and all the different kind of functions that you need to build into a company over time. But what I learned during that exploration is that the technology, especially around mobile robotics, had advanced a lot from when Kiva was started back in 2003. And so basically, there were companies that were creating almost like they're called a collaborative autonomous mobile robots or self-driving robots or self-driving vehicles in warehouses. So you're using some of the same sensors that you'd see on the Waymos of the world, the same software and the same GPUs, and just putting them onto mobile robots. And it really allowed you to rethink how you could automate a warehouse. So I just, during that exploration said, the tech is really interesting, but no one really had a compelling kind of solution that had a great return on investment and something that kind of passed the sniff test in front of customers. And so I took some time off and I talked to other people in my network and I convinced a couple other people and I said, look, I think we have this once in a lifetime moment to start a company. If we wait 5 years, we're going to kick ourselves because the moment will pass. But I said, I think if we get together and I convince Jerome, who's my other co-founder and my co-CEO, and then Chris Cassiopo, who is our CTO, and I said, look, let's start a company because I think if we bring our kind of brains together, we could actually start something with a lot of upside, but we can't wait. We have to do it now.
All right. So you're just getting started. You've got this great background with Kiva. You got co-founders. How did you get started with the early adopter customers?
Yeah. So when you start a company, I mean, there are many different ways to start a company, but especially as first-time founders, you have to create magic. And so back in 2015, we were convinced that we had something that was interesting. We quit our jobs and we focused on it full time, but we didn't have any money. We didn't have employees. We didn't have product. We didn't have customers. And so we talked, and we actually got pulled in by some investors to some like partner meetings. And we thought, oh, wow, like instead of raising like a little angel round, maybe we could raise from a VC. And we pitched the partners and they all said, we love what you guys are doing, but you haven't built a robot yet. We're like, well, we know that. We told you that, but they just want to learn more about the industry. So it's a little bit frustrating, but we kept at it. And so we raised some money from sort of some friends, families, and angels, raised enough money to get a small team together and to build our first robot. And based off that first robot, we then were able to raise more money. We were able to get some real customers. And it felt like we're always kind of bootstrapping over the first couple of years. But by a year and a half into it, we actually had robots that could solve a real business problem in customers' warehouses. And we had something. But what we didn't have is we didn't have something that was scalable. But that was kind of the first journey is where we had to like convince, get early capital to go get the early team, to build the early robot, and then to go show customers that we had something. Because everyone said, I think this is interesting, especially in warehousing. And I think the same applies to what I'm doing right now with the Navy is like seeing is believing. They want to touch something. They want to see it. Like you only can get so far with PowerPoints.
And what made your warehouse robotics unique? Because there are other companies out there doing things in that same space. I hope you are enjoying this interview. Just a brief word from our sponsor. As a longtime champion in the local startup ecosystem, Silicon Valley Bank supports innovative companies with the solutions and financing they need through every stage of growth. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com.
So at the time, our competition was kind of the traditional ways to automate a warehouse because Kiva wasn't really on the market, but there are other companies that were kind of copying the Kiva technology. But a lot of the technology at that point was either kind of conveyor, which would whip around boxes and inventory around a warehouse, or it was what you call like a automated storage and retrieval system, or basically like a big box in the middle of a warehouse where you'd stand around the outside and the kind of the inventory would be brought to you. Um, those systems were expensive. They took years to kind of like design and install, but they did improve your, pick rate improve. They'd improve your pick rates by like 3 to 4x. But what we saw is that if you could take a collaborative autonomous mobile robot and drop it into an existing warehouse, you could basically get 80% of the pick improvement at 20% of the cost. So it was a lightweight way to automate your warehouse. And at the time, our competition was companies like Fetch Robotics and Locust Robotics. And I think to this date, Locust and Six River are the kind of top two vendors in that space. But Locust and Six River, we were always kind of this head-to-head competition in the early days, competing against each other. But I will say I'm super grateful that Locust existed. And I think the founders of Locust would say the same thing about Six River, because now our customers are like, oh, they're two companies that are building technology. And they could kind of compete each other against each other, or they could compete Six River and Locust against each other. But that kind of created a market, because if it had just been one company in the market, people would be like, why is there only one company in the market? And am I basically chasing a technology that looks cool, but maybe there's not something that's actually there?
Yeah, it validated the market for it. So you went on to raise capital. If Crunchbase is accurate, it was 46 million over 3 rounds. Is that
That sounds about right.
okay? So you're building hardware, software, scaling. That's when I look at today's numbers of venture capital, that's not a lot. So it's pretty impressive what you're able to accomplish building the company that you did with a relatively lean amount of capital, especially when you're dealing with hardware, which, this statement always says hardware is hard, right?
Yeah. So we definitely took some of the early Kiva systems culture of being scrappy and being very mindful of your capital and resources and applied to Six River. And so at Kiva Systems, if you got an award, you actually got a paper plate, because they had a bunch of extra paper plates every time they ordered pizza for dinner to keep the engineers like happy when they're working late into the night. And so we took that mentality and said, you know what? When you build a company, it's hard. When you build a hardware company with some software on top, it's even harder. And so we're definitely mindful about the capital that we raised, but we had a great team. And I think the other thing is that when you're building a company and you're building a physical product, you basically get one swing at it, maybe one and a half. But if you get the initial product wrong, you don't get another chance to the investors. You don't get to go after a year and a half, be like, you know what, we tried and we learned, but if we just were to go back to the drawing board and we just need to pay twice the amount of money to go build something new, and give us another year and a half and trust us this time. And so the good thing at Six River is we got the product right out of the gate. And we got early customer adoption. So then we had paying customers, and we used those paying customers to fund the business. And so we were able to get to, I think, over 20 plus warehouses in the first 4 years, building a product from scratch with a relatively low amount of capital. And so even if we raised that $46 million when we got acquired, we still had a bunch of that in the bank.
All right. Like, we have so much to talk. I could talk to you for hours here, but I got to be mindful of, we got a lot to talk about with Bluewater too. But so how did the acquisition come together with Shopify? Like, I'm skipping over pretty much a whole
That's
journey
great.
of building a company, but
Yeah.
so how did that come together?
Yeah, so we built the company, and we were definitely like, when I joined Kiva, we were scaling it. In 2019, we were scaling Six River Systems. Like, we had the early adopters, and they were super successful. We had companies like XPO that were expanding our technology into many different warehouses. We were expanding it into international. But then we had this company called Shopify come around. And at the time, Shopify had announced that they were launching the Shopify Fulfillment Network, and basically a network of warehouses all around the world that could basically create the same type of economies and deliveries, or the speed of delivery that Amazon had, but for everyone else who wasn't kind of selling things on Amazon. And Jerome and I at the moment were like, we had this kind of flash and we said, this reminds us like this exactly where Kiva was when Amazon talked to them. And we always knew that we had to have some type of exit. We always thought that we'd have to take the company public because we didn't want to sell to kind of a traditional warehouse automation company because we didn't want to get boxed into like, you're the mobile robot guys. Like we really, like our vision was to create a fulfillment network where everyone could benefit from our technology. And Shopify had that same vision. But when we started talking to Shopify in 2019, we said, look, even if you want to buy our solution for multiple warehouses, like you're just one of many customers that we have to focus on. But you have a really big vision and you need to build out all the technology within the four walls of the warehouse. And we said the only way that you really can get our full attention is if you buy us. And at the same time, we actually had a term sheet for a Series C. And so we had to make a decision in a relatively short amount of time. But Toby, who's the founder and he is still the CEO of Shopify, is a really visionary person, someone that's just like, I don't know, it's just you just want to work for. And so in a short amount of time, we sold the company for $450 million in 2019 to Shopify. And then we started to integrate into our technology in the Shopify fulfillment network.
Such a great story. And it's what you accomplished is so hard to build, scale, and then, it's helpful to have that term sheet because then you're in a positioning of negotiation power to hopefully get the outcome that you did. So kudos to the team at Six River Systems on that outcome. All right. Bluewater Autonomy. So when did you announce your seed? Because that's when I first heard that you were building again. I was just like, wait a second, this is awesome.
Yeah. So we announced our seed in the spring of this year. We actually started the company last year, but we were kind of in stealth for a while. And what's different about Bluewater is we're designing and building autonomous ships. I call it like the largest mobile robot in the world. But unlike the mobile robots at Six River Systems or at Amazon Robotics, instead of building a robot that's in the tens of thousands of dollars, we're building something that's in the tens of millions of dollars. And so at Six River, we actually created our first robot in 90 days. It was built of 80/20 and dev boards. We actually 3D printed the shell to make it look really nice. But that's not something you can do just to build a ship in 90 days. And so myself and two of the other co-founders, and I can tell you more about them later, we started the company in 2024. And we spent the first 6 months just doing a bunch of research. We researched the supply base, we researched the technology, and then we also researched the customer. And we really wanted to make sure that when we started to build out the technology and kind of our first test vessel, that we hit the mark. Because again, go back to my early comment, like when you're doing a company that's hardware and software, you only get one swing at the plate. And so we really wanted to make sure we got it right. And so we actually spent a lot of 2024 kind of like in a conference room, holed up, doing a bunch of research and getting really smart. And it wasn't until sort of the end of 24 and the beginning of 25 that we really started to accelerate. And that's when we announced our seed round.
Okay. So yeah, let's take a step back. So how did you meet your co-founders? Because, when you hear about VCs and they, what do you look for in an investment? And they're like team, right? And when I look at your founding team, I was like, whoa, like these people are uniquely qualified to build what they're building.
Yeah. So the first co-founder I met was Austin Gray. Like myself, he'd served the Navy, had been on ships, and he got out and he was in graduate school. And Austin, he came up with the name Bluewater Autonomy, and he was thinking about how autonomous ships could help our fleet, and done a bunch of research. And I had left Six River Systems. I was actually spending a little bit of time with some VCs in the Boston area trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And when I met Austin, actually, so he's a little bit younger than I am. And so I'm used to kind of the email intros. And I got connected to another vet, and the vet connected me to Austin over text. And 2 hours later, we were meeting in downtown Boston, and he was telling me about his idea. And so that's the pace of kind of like Austin and myself. And I was like, I like this guy. And so we didn't start the company right away, and Austin was still at school. So we spent the next basically 6 months doing a bunch of research. And for myself, kind of having been in a couple other startups, I was just building up the conviction and trying to refine the idea to make sure this is something that really made sense and that we wanted to go full steam ahead with. And so Austin and I got to the point where we said, Austin's like, I'm going to pass on this job offer after graduate school. Let's do Bluewater full time. We'd been talking to one of my early investors from Six River System, who's ready to write a check. But I said, I've got two Navy guys, two Navy vets, but we don't have the CTO. We don't have the guys who actually help design and build all the technology for these autonomous ships. And so I basically pulled out my Rolodex, which in today's terms is LinkedIn. And I started going back and having as many coffees and lunches with all the people that I have a ton of respect for in the sort of robotics world. And that's when I met Scott Miller. Scott Miller is someone I've known for the last 10 years. But Scott was a early employee at iRobot when there were like 5 people working around a conference room on the Roomba, and then has been kind of this hardware software ninja working with a bunch of different companies in the Boston area. But what I didn't know about Scott, I actually thought Scott would potentially introduce me to 5 more people I should have coffee with, was that Scott not only has a background in robotics and early stage companies, but also has a love of the ocean. And I was actually talking to Scott earlier today. I was like, Scott, I think you have a tattoo of an anchor on your wrist. He's like, and so he pulled back his sleeves. He's like, I do. And he has a tattoo of a sailboat on his
No
arm.
way.
And he has a degree in ocean engineering from MIT. He's sailed all around the world. And like me and Austin, just has a passion for the ocean and boats and ships and all that stuff. And so we all, it's a little bit messy kind of pulling together the team, but we got an awesome team together.
He founded Dragon Innovation that I remember that was just a great, hardware helping other companies. I don't know if they were a consulting firm, but there was something in that world of helping them.
I tried to hire Scott from Dragon Innovation to 6 Systems when I met him. I think it was 2016. But Scott's like, I have my own company. He's like, I can't leave. But it's like, Scott, I like you. I love your background. I guess it took me 8 years to recruit Scott finally into a company that we could work together on.
Okay, so how did you get started with this company? Because the Navy, you have some inroads. You obviously are a vet, but it's a complex organization.
Yeah. So part of this was when I was at Kiva Systems, Amazon Robotics, think about what's next, and that's when I started 6 Systems. The whole idea of starting a company and selling technology into the Department of Defense or War, whatever you call it, was kind of novel. Like no one was really doing it. Andrew was just getting started. But if you fast forward to 2024 and even 2023, when I met Austin, there are a handful of companies, including Anduril and SpaceX and Palantir, that had started business, got backing from private investors, and then created products and been very successful selling to defense. That was kind of inspiring to kind of look into kind of autonomous systems within, DoD. But, Austin and I had been in the Navy, and we kind of had this first principle thinking and saying, our Navy today is a blue water Navy. The ships that we served on operate across open oceans. And so we said, what if you took like the payloads that were on these like really impressive manned warships, disaggregate them and put 1 or 2 on kind of an autonomous ship? And we did our math and we said, you could do these missions for a much lower cost and not put sailors' lives at risk, especially if you're carrying weapons or doing risky missions. And so that's where we started for first principles. But at the time, we got a little bit of pushback because the Navy had built some of these kind of this class of ship. The Navy called it a medium unmanned surface vessel, but they really had no budget to go build any more. It wasn't on the shipbuilding plan. It was kind of an orphan within the Navy. But Austin and I said, we said, we think there's something here. And if you just talk to kind of like at the mid-level people in the Navy who are very impressive, but like they're just kind of doing what their boss tells them to do, and they have a lot of work on their plate, they're just like, yeah, this is really interesting. We want to do some research on it. But there wasn't really a roadmap to go build like many and many of these. But it was not until we started talking to more of like the people who were involved in like force redesign for the Navy that said, there's something here with this medium, class autonomous ship. And they're just give it a little bit of time. But and so we said, look, we're going to start this company. We'll raise a little bit of money. We want to be a tech company. We want to sell in the Navy. And that was this, 2024. But if you fast forward a year, things have been on turbocharts, like the entire things have come around 180. The Navy's spending a lot of money on what we're doing. And so we didn't expect the company to accelerate this quickly.
And that's why you raised your Series A so quickly, your $50 million Series A.
We did. So we started the company. We got there, with the seed money. We got the team together. We basically have just outside of Boston, we have this 150-ton test vessel where we get to test all the hardware and the software and be really agile and iterative in all our testing. But at the beginning of this year, Congress actually, agreed with companies like us. We're basically, when I say lobbying, it's basically founder-led sales. It's me and Austin walking the halls of Congress, trying to get into any congressman or senator's office and explain what we're doing and saying, could you please put a little bit budget for this type of ship? It could do these different missions in different ways. And then we talk to people in the Navy. We'd be like, hey, like our background's this, and like we think we could solve the tech. So we convince people to actually make a bet again on this class of ship. And at the beginning of this year, there's a reconciliation bill where actually the most money for autonomous systems for the Navy was actually for the type of ship that we're designing and building. And so that was the beginning of the year. And we used that as proof to investors to say, we're not crazy. In fact, we've picked, this is a really good time. And we're one of a few companies that's focused on this area. But what we're building is, it's expensive. Like, it's not like we're building a mobile robot, and we need some capital to really accelerate this. And so we raised a $50 million Series A led by Google Ventures this year.
Amazing. Like, and that goes back to your original statement of grit, of like just walking the halls of Congress and lobbying for ultimately this type of budget, and having that passion and conviction that there's something here and you guys are uniquely qualified to build this. So along those lines, what you're building, you're not replacing like warships, like manned warships. These are optimized for delivery and payload, right?
We're making today's fleet even better. So we're not trying to say, get rid of all the manned warships. In fact, our Navy builds the best warships by far in the entire world. We build aircraft carriers, we build destroyers, nuclear submarines, you name it, they're world class. And we've had a world class Navy for the last 100 years, but we need to adopt to the times. And we're seeing all these different types of autonomous systems come out. And our focus is to how can we kind of complement today's Bluewater Navy. So think about like a guided missile destroyer. We know it's better than one guided missile destroyer. A guided missile destroyer with 4 kind of like 200-foot, 150-foot autonomous ships, basically kind of sailing alongside it. And they can carry extra missiles, they can carry radars, they can carry extra sensors. And the way I describe to kind of like my friends and family is like, think about a chessboard. On a chessboard, our Navy today has the really expensive pieces on the back, whether it's the castle or the knight, the queen, the king, you name it, the bishop. These are like the pieces that can do a lot of damage on a chessboard. But what our Navy needs is it needs the pawns. And so pawns don't replace all the pieces on the back of the chessboard. They complement it. And they're the first pieces that go and kind of, signal where the enemy is and what it's doing. And so we're basically creating the pawns for today's fleet. They're lower cost. They're easier to build because we don't have people on them. They're smaller side. We can upgrade them over time, and they're multi-mission. And so I'd like to say we came up with this idea. We didn't, but basically we've been partnering with the Navy and kind of hearing their feedback. And this is where the Navy wants to go. The challenge the Navy has had is actually moving the tech forward. And so what we're doing is we're taking private capital from companies like Google Venture and saying, we're going to make it better on ourselves. And if it doesn't work, don't pay us. But we're going to take the best talent from places like Boston, people that have built companies like Amazon Robotics and iRobot, and take that talent and then go apply it to this class of vessel.
That's amazing. I mean, I think of the analogy of SpaceX, right? Like how they commercialize space again, where it was just caught in this limbo of working with these defense contractors that would just work and budget and never get anywhere. And all of a sudden SpaceX comes and they have gotten a lot done.
And if SpaceX never worked, the government wouldn't have to pay anything. It was Elon and others who said, well, you have a vision. We're going to create rockets that are going to be lower cost. And by the way, reusable. And we're doing the same thing. And we actually we don't compare ourselves to like SpaceX or Elon Musk, but I think it's a good analogy for what we're doing. It's like what SpaceX does is it lowers the cost of taking payloads from the ground into orbit. And what we're doing at Bluewater is we're lowering the cost of taking payloads across the open ocean on a reusable platform. So you can send it out, it can do a mission, and it comes back. And you can put whatever payload you want onto it. And we're going to get better and better at doing this. And the cost is going to come way down over time because we're rethinking the problem. We're not putting people on a ship. We're not making these things with all military-grade technology. We're going to be cost-conscious. They're going to be attritable. They're going to be easy to produce. But at the end of the day, it's all about the payload and lowering the cost. And that's what we're doing for the open ocean in the same way as what SpaceX has done for space.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect analogy. It's like we're going to reuse rockets, and before SpaceX was like, can't do that. That's insane. Like
Yeah.
like impossible.
And what's even cooler is like what SpaceX did is I'm guessing a lot of SpaceX's initial kind of payloads were military or for the intelligence community. But then eventually there are also commercial payloads. And so we think the same way at Bluewater, where today we're focused on the Navy. They're a customer with a need, they're a customer with a budget, and we understand the customer really well. But as this technology matures and we can lower the cost of moving things around the ocean, we can move into commercial markets. Now, I don't think we're going to make massive container ships in the next 5 years
Oh,
that have
I was like, are
zero
you going to
people on
replace
it.
those things? Like, wow,
No, no,
that
no,
kind of makes
not
sense.
yet. I mean, some of our tech could be used on it, but in the same way, and I kind of use analogies from like Amazon. Amazon has this whole concept of middle mile logistics. So how can you move something from like the warehouse to the sort center, and then from the sort center it goes into there? Well, I like the concept of middle mile logistics in terms of like maybe there's stuff in like Portland that needs to move to Los Angeles, and maybe you don't need massive, large container ships. And moving stuff on the water is cheaper than moving it on the roads. And so I think that's one example of many where we can take the technology that we're developing and be a dual use company, and we can bring back the maritime industry back to the United States. And that's something that has really resonated because today, like our competition in the maritime industry is China, and China has 200x the shipbuilding capacity of the United States. And that's also why our Navy needs to adopt new technology, because we're not going to outcompete China in the next couple of years just in terms of getting tonnage into the, warship tonnage into the ocean. We need to outcompete them on tech.
Because what you're building is really hard. You got a new ship design. So designing ships, not easy. Systems, navigation, autonomous systems are not easy. And then building the ship. So how are you going about that? Like, what's the team look like? What's the plans ahead?
Yeah. So what we are building is hard, but we basically decomposed the problem into different components, and then we found the best people in industry to go solve those different problems. So when it comes to robotics and automation and software, we're pulling from kind of the Boston community. So again, as I mentioned, Amazon Robotics and iRobot and Boston Dynamics, and then my previous company, Six River Systems. We're taking all of that talent to basically solve the robotics problem. On the shipbuilding side, we just hired our chief operating officer, Tim Glanatsis, who spent 20 years building, the largest Navy ships that are out there, whether it's guided missile destroyers or supply ships. And then on the ship design, we actually took a team of people who worked on the most advanced autonomous ship. It's built by DARPA. It's called the Defiant. It's doing sea trials right now in the Pacific. And so we've basically, accumulated some of the best people that's out there, and we have capital to basically go solve this problem. And so all the people on our team have kind of done this before in a way, but when we pull them all together, I think we have the most compelling team to actually go design and build autonomous ships. But that's not going to make it like easy, but it definitely helps us kind of like cheat a little bit because we're not doing it for the first time.
What's the culture that you're looking to build?
So I think I'm taking the best from previous companies that I've been at, whether it's like Vistaprint or it's Amazon Robotics or it's Six River Systems. And today, we're relatively early. We've definitely moved beyond that seed stage company, and we have a team that's like highly capable and in the process of actually launching our first full scale ship next year. But there's something really magical about kind of like a team full of ninjas. And so, if I were to have a company of 500 or 1,000 people, the challenge with some of those large organizations is just inherently you build like layers of like bureaucracy, and making takes longer. And then you just hire sometimes political people who are more concerned about how many people report to them and what their title is, and less about the mission and the outcome. And in today's kind of culture, it's like, it doesn't matter where the idea came from. Information travels really quickly, and people don't feel encumbered by spending a lot of time filling out reports. Their focus is on building. And the best engineers that are out there, or some of the best, love building. And at Bluewater Autonomy, we are all about building really cool stuff that's really pushing sort of the boundary. And that allows us to attract the best engineers because they want to build. And it kind of goes back to like the early part of my career where like I am not the type of person who wants to be behind a computer doing emails and spreadsheets all day long. I like to build. And so that is what is special about companies that have private capital and that are kind of startups is that we spend 80 or 90% of our time building. And so going back to Bluewater, our culture is about building, it's about team, it's about the mission. And then, by the way, I think a lot of us have salt running through our veins.
What do you, in terms of hiring plans, like what are the key positions that you're hiring for across the different functional areas?
Yeah, so most of the hiring to date is just engineering. So whether it's on the software side, whether it's infrastructure, full stack, autonomy, perception, we're hiring mechanical engineers, firmware engineers, electrical engineers. And then there are a couple of kind of non-engineering roles, but like we definitely want to kind of be in this like mostly engineering kind of mindset for the near term. We've also made some really key partnerships. So rather than trying to do everything in-house, we, for example, just announced a partnership with a shipyard called Conrad that's in the Gulf. They have 5 locations, mostly in Louisiana, and they have 1,000 employees. So rather than hiring people to go build the ships and weld steel together, we found one of the best shipyards in the United States to go partner with us. And so that's just a way that we can move faster and we don't necessarily need to go hire people and open up our own shipyard.
All right. So what advice would you have for entrepreneurs trying to build a hardware company? Like, I mean, there's some really exciting companies that are venture funded in Boston that are this next generation of hardware and robotics, Bluewater being one of them. iBot, 10 Beauty. So what advice would you have for entrepreneurs on building hardware?
So if this is your first like work experience or first time being at a hardware company, generally, if you can go work for one of the companies that you just mentioned that has funding, that has a great team, that has some momentum, go learn from that company. Go learn about their culture. Go learn what it takes to get through the early days. Go learn what it takes to scale. And then if you really want to, take that experience and some of that network and then go start a company. But if you're just doing this right out of school, it can be really hard. That said, I think there's some examples of companies where the founders are coming right out of school or it's the first kind of hardware company they're doing. Like I think Whoop might be an example. I don't know their kind of founder, Will, as much other than reading some articles. I think he started right out of school. So there are definitely opportunities that are out there. But my experience has been learn from the best that are out there, join the companies. And there are a lot of really great companies in Boston that you can join and spend like 3 or 4 years there. If you're only there 1 or 2 years, it's usually not enough time to learn a lot. But 3 or 4 years is like a good chunk of time. It's like going back to high school or going to college again. Like just learn a lot, get really deep into an area, be successful, and then take that experience and then use that if you want to be a launching pad for a startup.
Advice, yeah. I mean, I think of iBot. They were at Form Labs, cutting their teeth there, and they had done this eye thing before, but the market wasn't ready, and they came full circle after Form Labs. So,
You mentioned at the beginning of this interview that you've done 400 interviews like this. And I hope that if you do 500, that maybe and if we're doing well, you'll say, hey, Rylan, want to come back for 500 or maybe 1,000? You tell me.
yeah,
But there's a lot of great content online. And so one way to learn is actually go join a company. And another way is actually listen to podcasts, watch videos online, go to Y Combinator. There's so much information so you can self-teach yourself. And now you have all these kind of AI tools that are out there too. But learn. Like I remember in the early days of Six River, I would be running along the Charles River and I'd be listening to podcasts about startups and listening to other founders and just absorbing as much information as I could. And that was all free and stuff that I could do in my free time. So like just be a constant learner if you ever want to start a company, or be a constant learner just if like myself, I enjoy it. It's something that makes life really special.
absolutely. And I think that's why I love doing this podcast because I just used to consume so much of this content where I'm like, maybe I should just do this myself.
You're
And
you're like a Boston startup like historian.
I,
I yeah. I know we can't pull up the emails that we had back and forth setting up this interview, but like you brought up all these names and these companies, and you know how it's all connected and intertwined, and it's pretty special in terms of like your perspective on the Boston community.
it's just I love figuring stuff out where I'm like, no way, like TaskRabbit, early days. So, anyways, it's just cool to pull everything together. And I think sometimes Boston just doesn't give it enough credit of things that they have accomplished, robotics and consumer and all these different things that people are like, I mean, Boston has led the way in so many of these categories. I mean, iRobot is such an amazing company of what they built, and I mean, it's just and it's. I mean, Colin Angle was on my podcast, and he's building again. So there's so many great entrepreneurs that are building again, and there's just so much good
Yeah.
stuff going on in Boston.
And if you think about the connections, so I'm looking over your left shoulder. You have a sticker of DraftKings. So go back to Jason Robbins and that early
Yep.
Vistaprint team that started DraftKings. And then you just mentioned Colin. And so Colin actually worked with Scott Miller's my CTO, an early employee at iRobot. And so they're all kind of connected. And if I had to pick up the phone today and ask Jason a question, he would answer it and help me kind of work through a problem the same way that Colin would help Scott work through a problem. And so it kind of goes back to like, if you're going to start a company, sometimes having that support network around you is really helpful. And then hire people who have that support network too. Like when you're hiring people, if you hire someone who'd been at a DraftKings or an iRobot or an iBot or any of these companies, they also bring their network and their learnings. And if they were a high performer at those companies, then they can also pick up the phone and call people and be like, we're trying to solve this problem. Can you help me out? And that's where I think is actually really special about the Boston community over other tech communities, because it's really not that big. And if you go to like the West Coast and like, I think San Francisco has a really like impressive like startup community, but it's also like, it's big. It's like the open ocean. It can be kind of overwhelming and you can feel like you're drowning at times. Whereas like the Boston kind of ecosystem, it's more like, I don't know, I'll call it like Buzzards Bay, which is like the armpit of Cape Cod, but it's a smaller body of water. Everyone knows each other. You kind of can navigate your way around. And that's what I just love. And that's why we're building this company in Boston.
Well, I started this comment earlier when we were starting off, and I just feel like your career has been something that I try to preach. So I have two daughters in college. And what I take away from your background is you went out and explored, right? From graduating from Harvard undergrad, I'm sure you could have gone
Yeah.
consulting, iBanking, but you
Yeah.
chose to go into the Navy. And then from there, you decided to do, the startups and then, HBS and then startups, I mean, and then joining robotics. So you've always just like, it seemed like you're always an open ocean yourself of exploration.
I think that's right. And I think it's even more important now. So it sounds like you're a couple years ahead of me in terms of being a parent, but I have two sons who are in high school, a daughter who's in middle school, but I want them to be explorers because I don't think the traditional jobs of being a consultant for your entire career or being a lawyer, I don't know if that's what people should necessarily aspire to do because technology is changing so quickly. And if you look at all these different AI tools, and so if you're an explorer today and you figure out the different tools that are out there, I think you can have a lot more impact on the world because the world is changing even faster than kind of what it has over the last 20 years. And so I think that explorer mentality for some people is really important. So if you combine explorer and constant learner, I think it can be a really kind of fun career.
All right, three rapid fire questions. Uh, Three apps you can't live without, can't be Slack, email, or calendar.
Slack, email, and calendar. Actually, no, I'm joking. I actually have found at this point in my career that I don't like my day to be run by apps or email or Slack. And I think it's really easy to basically have those apps control your life. And so I actually think some of the most productive days are when you can pull yourself away from your laptop, pull yourself away from your phone, and then work on the things that really matter versus having apps kind of like direct your life. And so I actually would counter and say the three apps that I like the most are the three apps like are like the non-apps, like just like they're meeting with people, having conversations like this, going to a conference room, having coffees, like pull yourself away from this app economy.
I love that answer. Actually, that's amazing because yeah, enough of the apps. Get in front of people and network. All right. How about a podcast? You talk about podcasts that you like to listen to while you're running or something. So what podcast or even book recommendation would you have for entrepreneurs?
Okay. So the book one is easy. I love The Box by Mark Levinson. It's all about the invention of the intermodal container and how it changed shipping and trade and just basically the world. But it didn't happen overnight. It happened over like 30 plus years. And it's a really cool story. And today, it's actually a book that I loved even before I started Bluewater, because it had to deal with like logistics and supply chain and automation. And now it actually informs a lot of how I think about Bluewater autonomy. So that's like my favorite book. And I've actually been kind of on a podcast with Mark a couple years ago.
What do you do for fun outside of work?
So I definitely like to play golf, but being back in kind of startup mode, I
You
played
don't have
golf once.
time.
I played golf once this year. It's kind of sad.
Right.
So I like to spend a lot of time with family. Like to spend a lot of time with work. And then I like to run. Our office is in Lexington, Massachusetts. So you can find me either before work or after work, actually running on kind of the Minuteman Trail.
Probably what you spend time thinking. Like it's just great to be running and process your thoughts. So.
No apps, no emails, although these AirPods, sometimes when you're running, will then remind you that there's a text by someone and then read it to you while you're running, which is a really bad feature. So.
Well, Rylan, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your professional journey, all the great companies that you've built and you're building. And thanks again for being guest 400.
Great. Keith, thank you. It was great.